Hi everyone, welcome back to the Real Stuff podcast. Today's guest is a friend of mine, Lindsey Metselaar, who has been on the social media scene for years and years. I first came across her dating and relationship content back around 2017 when she first launched her podcast called We Met at Acme. Today's chat dives into everything from her family's financial situation, which is not quite what the internet thinks it is. We go in deep on her relationship to weed and alcohol, and how over the past 5 years, she has completely transformed her life. As a new mom, we talk about her fertility journey that she recently went through and her entrance into motherhood. I've been following Lindsey for a really long time now, and I've heard her on a handful of other podcasts and other interviews, and I can assure you that this podcast episode touches on topics and subjects that she has not been asked about publicly before, and she certainly has not shared publicly before. And really, it's another great encapsulation of exactly what I want this show to be like for all of you as the listeners. I just have to call out the most recent 4 or 5 Apple reviews that this podcast has received. Every so often, someone from my podcast team will just send me a screenshot of one of the latest reviews that's come in. And these written reviews have been so deeply aligned with my personal mission and my vision for this show. It just seems like you guys get it. And you guys are getting exactly what I was going for with this show. Every single one of you who has left me a written review and then has screenshotted it and sent it over to me on Instagram DM has already heard back from me in a personalized voice note. It has been such a pleasure getting to meet so many of you that way and to chat with you guys intimately like that. It's really rare that I chat like that over voice message with people that are following me. So please, if you are loving the show and if you have a couple of minutes to spare, leaving a rating and a written review is so helpful to help other people who are interested in listening to the show find it and to get a little bit of a testimonial to see if they think they're going to like it. I would love to chat with you too, so if you do so, please send me a screenshot of it and I will send you a personalized voice note. Season 1 of this show is technically 40-something episodes, and we are more than halfway there at this point. And even though I am going to be taking some time off during my maternity leave, we are planning to have the whole slate of season 1 still up and running for you so that we can finish it out strong. I hope that you love today's episode with Lindsey. Let us know what you think over on social media. We are at The Real Stuff Pod, and enjoy. I typically start these interviews with the mental health pillar just because I feel like it helps the audience get to know the guest a little bit more, and it kind of loosens the guest up before we get into the money and sex topics.
Let's get loose, baby.
But I would actually like to approach this interview differently. And I think I want to start with money. Can we start with money?
Let's go right into the money. Show me the money.
Show me the money. All right. I want to start just by hearing how you grew up with money. What was your introduction to it, your family's background with it, and how is money talked about in your household?
Love these questions. I grew up with a dad who was an entrepreneur and a mom who did not work. But she did work, but then she stopped working when she had kids. So as far as I knew, she was a stay-at-home mom. And my dad, he went to law school and he became a lawyer and he hated it. And at the time, his dad had a very small, struggling travel agency. And that travel agency was about to go bankrupt. So my dad said, do not file. I will take over the travel agency and I will make it a success because I hate being a lawyer and it sucks.
As a lot of lawyers apparently do.
Right. Every lawyer is miserable. And my grandpa was like, okay. And my dad did that and he did an incredible job and he grew this travel agency and he found a niche for lawyers who travel. And he called it the Lawyers Travel Agency. And so they pitched it to law firms and things like that. We focus on lawyers travel, and it did well. And so then we started to have some money as a family. And my sister and I went to private school. We lived on the Upper East Side, but my parents were very much of the we are successful and you are not. We have money, you don't have money. So let's make that clear. Nothing that we have is yours to take if we give it to you, how wonderful, but we're going to say no to the toys that you want. And we're going to teach you that you have to make your own way. And so that's how I was raised.
I assume, though, that with the wealth that they were able to accrue from that business, that they were able to put you guys through college. And technically, even though you maybe didn't get cash into your hand, that you were able to kind of secondarily benefit from having that wealth.
Definitely. I mean, because he was in the travel business, we were able to go on these beautiful vacations. I was able to see the world in a way that was really amazing and have these wonderful experiences. I didn't have to have loans or anything in college. And that definitely set me up in a very nice way that I will forever be grateful for.
And being on the Upper East Side, likely surrounded by lots of wealth, would you say that you grew up feeling, I am wealthy, I come from a rich family, or did you grow up feeling lesser than the people around you?
I did not think that we had anything growing up. I mean, my mom is also, and she would admit this herself, like very stingy. And she was the one at home, like delegating out the allowance and things like that. And because she grew up with nothing, my dad grew up with nothing. So like her mindset, my dad was more generous because it was like, you know, what he was making. But my mom kind of always had a scarcity mindset with money. So when I would go to school, all the other kids were getting like, I don't know, $40 and she was giving me $10. And so like we would all go out to the diner after school and like I couldn't afford to like have a meal. And it sounds so stupid, right? Because it's like we had so much, but when it came down to comparing to friends, it didn't feel that way. And that's not me being like, oh my God, poor me. Like I'm just stating the facts where like in New York City, it's very much keeping up with the Joneses and like someone always is going to have more than you.
Hearing the way you talk about money, hearing what your mindset actually was about money, it is a little contradictory to sort of the general tone that you might hear on, call it a Lindsey Metselaar Reddit thread about your wealth and you being a trust fund baby or you just coming from this opulent background. How do you receive those kinds of comments on the internet?
It's so funny. I really don't read Reddit, but every so often a friend will send me something. And the funniest thing that someone ever sent me was someone said my dad was a billionaire. And I was like, how wonderful would that be? I mean, why would I be working? Like, why am I not flying private if my dad's a billionaire? I mean, these things, or that I have a trust fund, because I don't have a trust fund at all. I wish I had a trust fund. You know, I would love to have a trust fund, but I sadly don't. You know, going back to me telling you how I was raised, my parents very much, you know, were like, okay, after you graduate and you get a job, like you're on your own. And I feel very lucky because they still like open their homes to us and, you know, we can stay with them like in the Hamptons, which is incredible, but they haven't paid my rent. They haven't, you know, done anything. Like, of course they're generous if we really needed them to give us some like if we were in a situation, but there was no one supporting my life other than me and my husband, unfortunately. So
you can't believe anything you see on the internet, because I remember a video I did back at Refinery 29, something to do with money. And one of the comments was like, well, of course, XYZ, you know, of course she has this. Her uncle is Larry Fink, the founder of BlackRock. Or I don't know if it's Blackstone or BlackRock, one of those banks, someone with a Fink name who is absolutely not my uncle.
It's like, where does
and it's like, am I
anyone come up
supposed
with
to
this?
submit genetic records to like show that I have no relation to this Fink man? It is one of those things. People just will write, she's got a trust fund, she's this person's niece. And in fact, they're wrong.
Totally. Yeah. So I try not to read that stuff because if I know that what is being written about me isn't true, then there's no way that what's being written about anyone else is, you know? So it's just like...
Reddit is a dark place, and I too have only ever landed on it when someone I know has sent me something almost as a haha, check this out. But it is hard because part of you wants to rebut against these people, and refute the claims, and then the other part of you really just knows that it's not worth it to do.
Yeah.
When you met Steven and you guys were first going on a date, I heard you say somewhere that he had just left finance or he had just left a career and was working at a startup. So told you on your first date that he wasn't making any money or something like that. How did you receive that?
You're so good. I can't believe you found that. You definitely do your research. I love that. And I'm not surprised because you're such a hard worker. On our second date, Steven and I talked finances. It came up because the person I was dating before him did not share his salary with me. And I thought that was really weird because financial transparency is like a love language almost. It's just important, right? And so I thought that was weird. And it came up that he had not shared that with me on our second date. And Steven was like, oh, I'll tell you how much I make right now. Like, it's nothing because I'm at a startup. And, he told me like the exact number that it actually was. And like, we laughed and whatever, but I thought it was really a green flag that like off the bat, we had this conversation of finances and there wasn't like an awkward, I'm scared to broach this subject.
Did you feel like someone coming from a generally wealthy family where you felt secure growing up, whether or not you felt rich compared to the New York City billionaires or not, you still felt safe? Did you feel like a financial background was something that was an important factor you were looking for in a partner, someone who at least understood finances or who came from a secure background themselves?
Honestly, anyone would have had a better financial background than me because I knew nothing about finance, nothing about investing. It's embarrassing how little I knew about anything when it came to my money. I mean, I had like only recently gotten a credit card, I think, at that point. I was like a debit card girly for a long, long time. And so it definitely was great that Steven had all those years at Goldman and had gone to business school and knew about finance and was good at math and all of that stuff. But anyone would have been better than me, truly. It's embarrassing.
I want to go back to, I think it was 2016 or 2017 when I was a guest on the We Met at Acme podcast. I was live. I forget where we were, somewhere in New York City. And there was a live studio audience. It was actually, I think I must have been engaged at the time because the topic of my engagement came up. And, you've done a million interviews on your show. So I can't say with certainty that you're going to remember this moment. But as someone who, that was one of the first podcasts I think I was on as a guest. And what I remember from that interview is one of the questions you asked me was, are you guys signing a prenup?
Of course I remember this. And we were at City Winery.
City Winery, that's where we were. The topic had come up between me and Michael at that time in my life. I 100% thought of prenups as a negative start to a marriage. And I just sort of had the media's image of it. I don't feel that way anymore, although we didn't sign one. And so I replied that no, we were not getting one, and sort of just talked about my feelings behind it. And then I remember asking you, well, are you going to get one? And you definitely weren't with Steven at that time, but I don't know if you were in a relationship or what. But I remember without a beat, your response, abso-fucking-lutely, something like that. To which the crowd erupted in cheers. And I was kind of sitting there thinking, is my decision the poor decision? Does everyone agree with this? And taking out agreement, because now I am actually very much in favor of people signing a prenup, and I don't think it needs to be or is a negative thing. But I would just love to hear, did you wind up signing a prenup in your marriage? And let's talk about your thoughts on them.
Yeah, so we didn't end up signing a prenup, which is so ironic and hilarious. Not for any reason in particular. I think probably similar to you and Michael, we were just so positive and everything around our wedding was so positive. And not that it is negative, because it is not, but we just didn't see a reason for it. I think if we lived somewhere else where like the laws weren't protected against, certain things in marriage, and you probably know this better than me. I actually don't know the exact law, but in New York State, like the law around marriage, if you divorce, it's everything's 50-50, but what's yours before marriage is still yours, and what's yours, obviously after is still yours. And that's that's the standard. And so that sounds great. If God forbid anything were to happen, we're both cool with that. So that is like the prenup is the New York law to us. If I had a trust fund, right? If he had a trust fund, if there were multiple things in both of our names, whatever, we would go back, we'd get a postnup together. I think we're so open about it and not concerned about our like assets and our money in terms of it, that we'd be fine. But I do think that, for example, let's say Steven worked for his family. That's often a situation where a prenup is like really necessary, because you're protecting not just what you have, but what your family has in the event of, something crazy happening in your marriage. When it's just what you have, it's I feel like less of a necessity. But again, like any divorce lawyer is going to tell you to get a prenup. And I've had them on my podcast and I totally agree with them. It is funny because I do sound like a hypocrite, but it just wasn't something that we thought was necessary.
I think there's obviously no way to know if you're going to want one or need one when you're not even in the relationship yet, as you weren't.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
My takeaway from that conversation we had, and also from the audience's reaction to your definitive yes, you were getting a prenup, was kind of that it was this female empowerment move.
Oh, exactly. Yes.
To get one. I could see how it is a very important thing to do, especially in the event of a family trust. The idea of you saying that, of course, you're going to get one, I think just maybe feeds into people's perception of, oh, she must have a trust fund, or, oh, she must come from this exorbitant amount of wealth.
Right.
Today's episode of The Real Stuff is sponsored by Dreamland Baby. Ever since Milo was a newborn, we have loved their pajamas, and as he's grown, they've just been perfect for him at every single stage. So he started off wearing the full body onesies, the ones with the little cuffs that you can pull over their hands and feet. So perfect for a newborn. Then he moved on to the zipper footies, also so easy for a new baby. And now he wears their 2-piece pajama sets pretty much every single night. All of their pajamas are so silky and cozy. It's their luxe weave fabric, which somehow gets even softer every single time it goes through the washing machine. Some other pajamas from other brands are really good quality and they're really durable, but they're super stiff and uncomfortable, and somehow they seem to get crunchier and even stiffer after coming out of the washing machine. But these are just the opposite, and they're so comfortable. So it's really no wonder when we let Milo choose his pajamas, he always pulls the Dreamland Baby pajamas. If you're buying pajamas for your own baby or for a loved one's baby, you can go to dreamlandbabyco.com and enter my code, all caps, real stuff at checkout, which will get you 30% off pajamas and free shipping. And the offer is for both new and existing customers. So that's dreamlandbabyco.com using the code REALSTUFF, all caps, to get 30% off plus free shipping. I would just love to shift into your career journey and the building of your own wealth. How did this whole We Met at Acme brand, and then just the other extensions of your brand that you have? I know you have a food account. How did everything sort of grow and evolve?
I was always very social media inclined. I had a Twitter account in college that had like 40,000 followers because Twitter was like the thing. When I was in college, Instagram did not exist. I know I'm aging myself, but Twitter was 33. So Twitter was where it was at. And so I had this account that I started with girlfriends at college, and it blew up and I loved it. I loved putting something like witty in there and like into the world and other people seeing it and liking it and sharing it. And when I graduated, I was wanting and looking for a job in social media, but it didn't exist at the time. That wasn't a career. Then Instagram started to become a thing. And then eventually it became a career. And so I started doing social media in-house for brands. And it was really cool to be able to see what people liked and interacted with on social media. But eventually it got really tiring, kind of building other people's brands like over and over again. And I started to wonder, like, what is something that I like to do? And at the time it was date and talk to people about dating and be the person in my friend group that people went to for dating advice. And so podcasts were becoming a thing. It was 2017. And like Serial was blowing up, that podcast, and a lot of news podcasts were around, but there weren't dating podcasts at the time. And I was like, what if I just talk to friends about my like live dating experience in the city right now, and recorded it? And so I did. At the time, I was going to Acme, a bar in the city, all the time, meeting people. And I was like, what if I called it We Met at Acme? It was kind of a long, odd name, but for some reason it felt right, you know, when things just feel aligned. And I started recording and releasing episodes, and that's how it all began.
And then at what point did you introduce Don't Expect Salads, your food account?
So my food account was actually, it predated We Met at Acme. My food account was just like a fun thing on the side, and it still is to this day. It's not really monetized. It's literally just me hating salads and loving chicken fingers and sharing that with the world. What expanded out of We Met at Acme is like our mixers, live events, touring. One of our great live events, you were the guest and you were awesome. And dating coaching and things like that. And like, you know, partnerships and that stuff. But I would say like business wise, it really started with We Met at Acme. The food account was more just like silly.
Do you remember the first time ever making money and monetizing off of We Met at Acme?
I do. I was making like $100 or $200 an ad. I was with a company. So Dear Media didn't exist when I started my podcast, which is the podcast partner I'm with today. It was like a random sports advertiser company that I partnered with. And I was doing ads for sports on my podcast. Like it had nothing. I was like dating and being a girl and like, did you see the Jets? And you should buy this new like wagon to bring to a Jets game. And it was so not aligned, but I was just like desperate to start monetizing. And so I worked with this brand, and they mostly worked with men and sports podcasts. And so the ads had nothing to do with what I was talking about. I was definitely not selling anything that I was talking about. And I was making like $200 an ad. And then I got reached out to by Paige Port, who's now the president of Dear Media. I think she was even the president back then, because she was one of the original founders with Michael. And she was like, we're starting this women's podcast network, because at the time it was just women. She was like focused on women, and like, we'd love for you to be one of the first podcasts. And I was just like, sounds cool. I obviously am not doing well with my sports podcast guys. So let's do it. And that's how I started to monetize, like in a bigger way.
Knowing that your podcast was an established entity at that time, and they were sort of taking it for their network and then obviously helping you monetize. Have you ever shared whether or not they paid you a flat fee to buy the podcast, to buy the rights? And in 2017, how much does a successful podcast cost?
Such a good question, because I don't know if you're versed on the whole Call Her Daddy drama, but part of why there were so many issues with Call Her Daddy leaving Barstool was because they owned the rights to the podcast. When Dear Media sent me their first contract, I didn't have a team like at all, but there was one really amazing woman who was 24 at the time, and she worked at the sports company. And when I was like, I'm leaving this company and going to this new place, Dear Media, she was like, I'm quitting and I'm coming with you and I'll be your manager.
Oh, wow.
She's like, I like your podcast so much. I hate working at this random like sports advertising company. And like, I'd love to come with you. And I was her first like client, and this was her first like foray as a manager. So it was just her and I, and we got this contract from Dear Media. And I didn't know much, but I knew that when I got a contract, I needed to get a lawyer or like have a lawyer look at this. And I can't remember if either her dad was a lawyer or we sent it to my uncle who was a lawyer, but a lawyer in our vicinity looked at it and they were like, take this, this, and this out, and they like shouldn't own the rights. And so we redlined back and forth for so long. And I think that Dear Media at the time, having like not existed before, they were very kind and lenient with the things that we pushed back on. We were able to basically sign over to Dear Media. They didn't buy us because there was like nothing to buy at the time, but they also didn't own the rights. And we agreed on a 70-30 split, which is what most podcast networks still do today.
That's what I hear. Dear Media is kind of their standard split with creators who start a podcast. I think I've shared here on this podcast before that with this podcast, The Real Stuff, because I was launching it with a network that was helping me get it off the ground, and it wasn't an existing podcast, that a successful podcast yet that a network was taking. When I was shopping out with these different networks, almost every offer to me was a 50-50 split. And that's what I'm in right now. And it's obviously something I hope to shift in the future towards closer to a 70-30 split. But it almost felt to me at the time like, well, if I want to start this podcast and I want someone to take a chance on this unknown idea, I kind of have to be more lenient. But as a creator, you know, no one really wants a 50-50
That's so
split.
interesting, because I think that you could have totally gotten a 70-30 wherever you wanted, because you already have the following.
And I know I will. I know it will shift into that eventually. Now, as a creator that has, we met at Acme, and now you're an influencer as Lindsey Metselaar. What about now with brand deals? What are your rates?
You know, it really differs between the account, like the ask and this and that. So I swear this isn't a cop out, but I can't give you like a hard answer. I will say that like, and I imagine you agree with this, like we prefer stories because I try to protect the authenticity of my grid. And if it's going to be something on the grid, like it has to be, you know, worth the time and the effort that it takes. The rates vary, but, you know, a good deal, I would say, is something above 10, but I think there's flexibility always.
It is always hard for creators to give a number to that because, you know, I've shared before that I've done the exact same partnership in terms of the exact same deliverables and ask from two separate brands. Mm-hmm. And for one brand, they might be paying me $1,500 or gifting me product. And for another brand, it could be $20K. And it's kind of dependent on what your team or what you as the negotiator was able to get the brand to, what kind of budgets they were working with, how big the brand is,
right? It's
whether
so
or not
true.
you wanted the product.
Mm-hmm. And there are some brands that you genuinely love. Like, for example, right now, I love Coterie diapers, like truly love. They're all my son wears. If they came to me today and they were like, we really want to do a partnership with you, but we can only give you like free diapers and like $100, I'd be like, done.
You're like, I will take a lifetime supply of Zachary
totally.
diapers.
Like it just depends on what's happening for you at the time. And also if the brand is naturally really aligned with you, because then it's barely an ad.
Speaking of diapers, congrats on being a mom.
Thank you.
So Lindsey had her first child, Zachary, recently. How old is he now?
He's 6 months.
6 months. And I wanted to get into a little bit about your fertility journey. Can you just share the Spark Notes version of what you guys went through?
Yeah. So we got married in February 2022 and deeply, truly thought that we would be the people that get pregnant on their honeymoon. Like deeply, truly. I had never been off birth control since I was 15. So that was like, I don't know, a long ass time. Again, not good at math. When I went off birth control, I didn't get my period. So I was like, I'm pregnant, obviously, you know, duh. Like, of course it worked out how I wanted it to. And not the case. The next month passes, also no period. The next month passes, also no period. no pregnancy either. Starting to get a little confused, and I would say gave it about like 6 months because I was like, maybe my period will come. I've been on birth control for so long, who's to say it comes back right away? And my gynecologist was like, sometimes it takes a year. And I was like, okay. Waited 6 months and went to my OB and was like, still no period, and I'm not waiting a year because like I have a weird feeling. And she's like, why don't you go meet with a fertility specialist and just like see what the deal is. And I was like, great. Went to go meet with a fertility specialist and had like what they call unexplained infertility, according to them, or so I thought. And this just meant that I wasn't ovulating. Or it could mean a bunch of different things. For me, I wasn't ovulating because I wasn't getting a period. And you need to get a period to get pregnant naturally or like on your own. And so we did a few different things, a few different options. For me, that was triggered ovulation and timed sex, which is not fun. After doing this for 3 months unsuccessfully, I was like, this is weird because the rates of it being successful are high enough that it probably should happen by 3 months. I was like, let's get a second opinion, which if you're listening and you're dealing with any fertility stuff, you should get a second opinion from the beginning. And we went to a smaller fertility clinic called Spring Fertility. I don't mention the name of the first place because some people have good experience with that place and some people don't. But I don't want to taint anyone's experience. We went to Spring Fertility, which is a wonderful place. Met with a doctor named Katha Fisher. And immediately we did a vaginal ultrasound and she said, you have textbook PCOS. And I said, what the fuck is that? I was like, no, I don't. This is so scary. I was hysterical, like inconsolable. I didn't know anything about PCOS, but I knew in my mind, I was like, it's a disease and I'm dying, basically. Like I am dying. I just got a diagnosis of death. Steven was like all happy. And I was like, what's there to be happy about? And he was like, we have an answer. Like, do you know how many people don't have an answer to why they're not getting pregnant? Like, this is a huge deal. Like, we have a diagnosis and now we can treat it and we can get pregnant. And I was like, no, this is horrible. My life is over. Like, I have to eat keto. Like, I hate everyone. He was like, no, this is really great. And our doctor was amazing. She's wonderful. And then from that point on, we had a choice. And we could either now treat the PCOS and continue to try to get pregnant, or we could choose to do IVF, which would likely expedite the process, but also be great for genetic testing in case we had any genes that we wanted to get rid of. And we still had some more genetic testing to do. And of course, at that point, we wanted to expedite the process. It had been a year. So we were like, let's do IVF. And also, and this is very important, especially because you're all about the financial transparency on this podcast, we thought our IVF was going to be covered by insurance. We ran it through as like a test and it was covered. And so we were like, great, we're not even paying for this. Like, we got to do it.
Okay. And was it covered?
It was not covered.
Okay, so before we get into the price of it, I did see that you wrote somewhere that in addition to the PCOS diagnosis and in addition to the general struggle to get pregnant, that you and Steven had some genetic reason for wanting to move to IVF. Was that kind of a case where you both were carriers for the same genetic disorder?
It was not, but this is the one thing that I'm not going to elaborate on, just because it's not my medical information to share, if you catch my drift.
Highly respected. The cost of this procedure, my understanding is that the egg retrieval process alone can be something like $25,000.
Yeah.
So insurance covered nothing?
Insurance covered $4,000 of the whole process.
Of the whole process, from the retrieval to
the transfer to the genetic testing.
Right.
Retrieval, I think, is like 18. Genetic testing is between 5 and 8,000, and then a transfer, I think, is another 10,000.
So we're talking like almost 35,000 total.
Yeah.
What was the flaw in the insurance that it said it was covered and it wasn't?
I don't know. It was really weird. It was it was Steven's insurance through his startup. So he had chosen the insurance himself, and we ran it with the spring team, and it ran as if it was going to be covered. But Steven was always skeptical. He was like, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be covered because I chose the insurance. It's not like that great of insurance. Also, at that point, we weren't like gonna let anything stop us, and we did think it was covered. And then when we filed the claim, they came back to us with only 4,000, and Steven's still fighting with them to this day. But
it is crazy because the amount of people these days, as we were talking about earlier, the amount of people that have to do IVF for various reasons these days, I am shocked by the cost and the fact that it's not universally covered and the amount people are having to pay out of pocket. And it's really becoming a privilege to have kids.
It's wild. And I will say there are so many incredible companies that people work for that do cover it or cover rounds of egg freezing. And if you are listening and you're at a company like that, take advantage of it, like full advantage, especially if you're planning on leaving at some point, you know. But both of us are working for ourselves, so we didn't have that opportunity.
All right, so now we can go back to mental health. Now that I've loosened you up with money, and here we are, I want to go back to childhood Lindsey. I have heard you talk a little bit about having some anxiety growing up, having a lot of girl drama and competition with schooling, and just maybe a little bit of a toxic environment that led to anxiety, which later kind of led to a type A personality and drug use. What was going on in that childhood with girl drama?
I went to an all-girls school, an all-girls private school in the city, like a very competitive one. And
was it like Gossip Girl?
Not only was it like Gossip Girl, the author of the book that Gossip Girl, oh no, sorry, I was thinking Mean Girls. It was very much like Mean Girls.
Oh, like Mean Girls.
Not as much like Gossip Girl. But I will tell you that quick story, which is that the author of the book that Mean Girls was based off of, Rosalind Wiseman, she wrote a book called Queen Bees and Wannabes. She came to talk to our grade and like wrote slut on the whiteboard. Like that scene in Mean Girls, I don't know if I doubt we were the only school that she went to, but she came and she did that thing like that she wrote about in the book, which was really crazy.
Likely because the
principal
faculty was saying these girls are mean girls and need help.
Exactly. And so there were some Gossip Girl moments, but it was mostly, you know, we're talking about middle school here. It was really scary. You know, we're all so insecure. We don't know ourselves. Our bodies are changing. We're trying to be cool. We're trying to fit in. And, you know, there was a popular group and people were getting dumped from the popular group periodically. And you were just hoping it wasn't your time. And it always was at some point. And like that stuff just like damages you. And so I definitely had some PTSD from all the girl drama at some point. And then things got better in high school. I actually ended up changing schools to an even smaller all-girls school, but my sister was there. So, you know, when your sister's around, you feel like a little bit more protected.
When you were in high school and early college, were you very into the drinking and smoking culture then?
No, and it's so funny because I'm actually coming from being on a podcast about sobriety this morning and talked about this a bit, but I was very much a good girl until junior year of high school. I was very much like I always had a boyfriend. I never drank. I never smoked. I waited a long time to have sex, and it was only with my boyfriend. I just thought that I was going to be that girl who like didn't do a drug or didn't have a drink until I was like 30. And it just so happened that I didn't like find the thing I was interested in yet. And for me, that was smoking weed. And once I did that and it kind of relaxed me, it eased my anxiety. It took me to like a really fun place. I was like, I'm going to do this forever.
Do you remember the first time you tried that? Just absolutely loving it?
Totally. I'll never forget. I was at my friend's parents' house in the Hamptons, and it was like 3 of us girls, and we were playing Credit Card Monopoly. It had just come out. we smoked a joint outside. It was like her sister's weed or something. And it was the first time I knew to inhale properly. And we just had like the most fun, laughing night, like Cheetos, everything, the whole 9 yards. It was like you're out of a movie, first getting high night. And I was like, this is amazing.
And then how did your relationship to weed evolve as you really got, I guess, in your words, addicted to it?
It was really good. It was a great relationship for a long time. And then it got to a point in college, I would say around my sophomore year, where, you know, part of smoking weed, especially when you're young, is like the element of it being a group hang and getting you close with friends, and you pass a joint and you tell a story. I definitely started to have a problem, you know, sophomore or senior or junior year of college, because I didn't want to share the weed at that point anymore. I was happier when I was smoking alone. My anxiety was heightened when I was in a group smoking, because I was like, when am I going to get the joint? Like, why is this person taking it? Like, why aren't they passing it? You know, like I wasn't focused on the social aspect anymore. I was just like, I need it. I need it. And I needed it to sleep, and I needed it to eat, and like I needed it to study, like as if it was Adderall. Like it was weird.
And at that time, it sounds like it was kind of taking over your life and your personality. And did you start to kind of feel like people are associating you as a stoner?
Totally. And I thought that was really cool. I was like, I am stoner girl. Like I am that easygoing girl who doesn't give a fuck about anything. And like guys are going to love me because like I can roll a sick joint. Like it was crazy.
So what pulled you out of this?
Like nothing for a long, long time. I was very deep into it even after college. It was only when I turned 28 that I had the openness to be like, this is not working for me anymore. This is not manageable, because like I would go on vacation, and before leaving the airport, I had to secure where I was getting weed from on that trip. I was not able to date guys who weren't okay with me smoking every day and every night. And it was ruling my life. And I was smoking weed on my podcast. I mean, it was embarrassing and so obvious how reliant I was.
So at this point, you had your podcast, and I'm assuming your online persona, I mean, not even to mention your real life persona, but your online presence was kind of wrapped up in this being a weed smoker and being this chill girl who is funny. And when you made the decision to stop, which by the way, when someone stops smoking weed, is that called getting sober?
Well, I didn't just stop smoking weed. I stopped drinking. I stopped any like mind or mood altering things.
But when you made this decision to stop weed altogether, how did that play out on your podcast with your audience who knew you as this girl and maybe who thought of you as this chill, cool smoker?
I actually didn't say anything for a while because I didn't know if it would stick. I didn't know if I was going to go back to it. And I didn't want to be that person who is like, I stopped smoking and you should too. And oh, just kidding, I'm smoking again. I think it's really important to have something like down pat, something that's serious before you share it with anyone who you could potentially influence. And so I didn't talk about it for years on my podcast. I wasn't hiding it, but I didn't talk about it.
Do you feel like your personality changed though and people picked up on it?
No one picked up on it, which is the weirdest thing. Like I thought that my podcast was going to die when I stopped smoking, because I was like, I'm going to have no creativity. No one's going to want to hear what I have to say because I'm going to be boring and type A, and no one noticed the difference. And the podcast actually started doing better.
That had to have been very validating that you had that fear and then no one said anything and no one even noticed.
Right. I mean, it just shows how much like we're in self all the time.
So what were some of those positive mental health changes that came about after you kind of cold turkey cut everything out?
My anxiety totally disappeared. I had so much energy. I was like waking up 8 a.m., ready to take on the day, ready to do a workout. I never worked out before. I used to be afraid of workout classes because I was paranoid. I was like, people are going to be watching me and thinking I'm bad at this class. I was like all into the workout classes. I was so good at my schedule. I was a better daughter, a better partner, a better friend. I was showing up for people more. I was looking within more and taking more responsibility of my behavior. And, you know, when you like work a program, you make amends, like you make things better in your life. And that's the whole point of it. And so I really do feel like my life improved. I felt free. Like I mentioned the vacation thing, I was able to go anywhere and just enjoy.
Did you feel a genuine sense of what I'm doing now is cool? Or was there ever a part of you that felt judgmental of the decision you made?
Oh, so judgment. I was like, this is not forever. My whole thing was like, this is temporary. And then when I go back to weed, I'm going to get really high because like my tolerance is going to be super low. Or when I like drink again, you know, it's going to be amazing. I didn't think that, like, I wasn't judgmental of myself, but it definitely wasn't, I didn't think it was cool to be sober. Whereas now I feel like it kind of is.
And now you're what, over 5 years in?
I'll be 6 years sober in October.
Wow. I feel like now, at least from the outside, when I hear you talk about it, you have this confidence about it and you do identify. Maybe it's because sober curiosity has become, quote, cooler and just more mainstream, but I don't get any vibes that you feel lesser than or not cool from being that person.
No, and I think part of that is because I know so many wonderful sober people and I respect them so much and I think they're so cool. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for, I have a lot of great sober role models and I think that helps.
I just have to jut in here that I've heard you say that you've never tried coffee.
I've never tried coffee. It's insane.
How is that so? How is that possible?
I have no idea, especially because when you get sober, like you start basically getting addicted to coffee, like everyone else that I know. And so no coffee my whole life.
You've never tried coffee. I've never tried weed. So there we
go.
are. Maybe one day I'll introduce you to coffee and I guess you won't be introducing me to
I
weed.
won't, but if you ever do smoke, I feel like you need to record yourself because the world would love to see that.
Do you feel like you will never smoke or drink again? At this point, has it become a definitive decision that you've made, or are you still kind of like, if I want to, I will?
I think it's like every day is a new day, meaning like today I'm not going to. Tomorrow, I don't know, but probably not. The benefits have been so amazing. And I don't feel like I'm missing out.
And I'm sure with your foray into motherhood, you feel even better about this decision than ever.
Oh my God. I can't even fathom being like in the newborn stage and drinking because I was getting 2 hours of sleep if I was lucky. If I was also hungover, I was so crazy about breast milk and like making sure I had every like drop. Like if I had to pump and dump, I would have jumped off a cliff.
This little baby of yours, 6 months old, I've seen, some of the cutest photos of him on your socials. I've obviously seen you transition and turn into a mom and seen how you've changed somewhat on social media. But one thing, unless I've missed it, one thing I feel I haven't seen a lot of, which I'm curious if you feel, is content around any sort of negative emotions of transitioning into motherhood and any sort of identity loss you may have felt or any, obviously postpartum's hard for everyone. And I do remember you sharing some of that, but in general, how was becoming a mom for you and mentally, how are you doing now 6 months into it?
It was really amazing. And I like knock on wood, like I'm so grateful that I've had such a positive experience. I know it's not the case for everyone. There's a lot of things that I owe to that. One of them I think is sobriety. Another one of them is gratitude because of how hard it was to get pregnant. So I just never in a moment, like there was not a moment where gratitude left me in new motherhood, especially because I have friends still struggling with getting pregnant. And that like really, puts things into perspective for you when you're complaining about like your kid throwing up. It's like, well, they don't even have a kid to throw up. And they're really wanting that. I think also, and this is the most important thing, and again, this goes back to finances, but it takes a village. And if you do not allow that village to help you, you will go into some sort of depression. And obviously there's also just chemical imbalances. And if you're depressed, even though you have a village, there's nothing wrong with you and you're amazing. But for me, those are the things that I feel prevented my hormonal imbalance. I also breastfed for as long as I possibly could. And I think that helped me like not have like a total dip. I attribute my lack of roller coaster to all of that. And I love being a mom. I truly love it. Like, it's amazing. And I feel like you're the same, right? Or did you end up having like a dip at a certain point?
I too will say that, I love being a mom. I also knew I wanted to be a mom, had been with my partner for 10 years before we even tried. And both of us were all in and, quote, ready for it. But in that, at least I would call it the first 3 months of being postpartum, I was definitely hit with what my doctor told me wasn't postpartum depression, but was maybe a serious case of the baby blues. In that, coming home from the hospital, and maybe it was the time of year, it was November, maybe it was the resurgence of a new COVID strain at the time, and it made a lot of anxiety around people coming over, whatever it was, also the hormones. I felt like my first few weeks, maybe couple months back home, were just not as blissful or as light and airy as I assumed they would be and as I sort of wanted them to be. And I felt this immense heaviness and weight. And, I remember Michael and I both together almost every night when the sun would set at 4 p.m. just start crying together and really feeling like this life that we loved had been totally uprooted and changed. Who are we now? What is our identity? Are we ever going to be able to go out to a coffee shop with friends again? Are things ever going to feel light again? And I'm pleased to say they do. And, our life this time, this pregnancy and this second time around of introducing a second baby, I have high hopes that my postpartum experience will be different. We're now in a house, not as confined in a New York City apartment. We already have our lives revolving around a toddler who goes to school and is on a schedule, and we're already on that baby schedule.
Yeah.
And our whole community is other parents. But yeah, I definitely felt more darkness around it than I ever anticipated. I only ever saw people bringing home new babies and thinking to myself, they must be in pure happiness 24/7 with that thing.
Yeah. But I also totally understand going through baby blues. And I think that that's so normal. I could have experienced that too. I feel like I didn't. I did experience like personal blues. I just had a major surgery, a birth I didn't expect. And I think I was really, struggling to walk and to laugh and to cough. And my C-section pain was like intense, but I did feel this like immediate connection with my son. And he was just he was like a bundle of joy. Having said that, like, I was definitely feeling depressed going through my fertility journey. I mean, it all evens out at some point, like we, and I've spoken about this on podcasts, like moms do not get out unscathed. We're going to go through something.
In those first few weeks or months, did you guys have a baby nurse or a night nurse?
We did. And as you know, a baby nurse is very expensive, and it's the best money that we've ever spent.
Speaking of that village, so aside from that nurse who was there and helped you, are both your parents and Steven's parents local and nearby and very involved?
So my son was born January 18th, and my parents and his parents both spend their winters in Florida. So it was tough. Obviously they came in for when he was born, but then they went back. And it was hard not having our sets of parents. When they were there, they were extremely helpful, but they didn't just like uproot their lives to be there. And I understand that. So it was like, if we didn't have our baby nurse, we would have had nothing.
And I do, just for transparency's sake, want to call out, I'm not necessarily going to ask you to share. You can feel free to if you want. But in our case, we had a nurse stay with us full time for 4 weeks. we had initially wanted a night nurse, like someone to just sleep there, but because of the timing with COVID and people not wanting to commute in and out all day, nurses at that time were pretty much only accepting 24/7 roles. And a lot of people ask me, how much does it cost to have someone like this? I think depending on where you live, what market we're talking about, whether it's full time or just overnight, the rates can be wildly different, as I've now seen with many friends. In our case, our nurse charged us, I think it was $350 a day. And if I'm doing the math correctly, for the 4 weeks that she was with us, it came to about $10,000 to pay her. And so, yes, a big expense, an expense that Michael and I planned for pre-baby, and actually planned for very quickly pre-baby because I didn't even know about nurses. Like, my mom didn't use a nurse. My husband's mom didn't use a nurse back in the 90s. It was really only my followers who mentioned to me that I should get one, and that's when I started looking into it.
Yeah.
And now I kind of see that it's a very prevalent thing within our community and, the Upper East Side of New York City. It's a big expense, but it changes the postpartum life.
And you learn so much.
Mm-hmm.
I learned everything that I know about how to take care of my son from my baby nurse.
You have a sister who had kids prior, so I think that's also something that contributes to your knowledge maybe of what is coming in early newborn days, and maybe a reason for a transition feeling a little bit more seamless. I genuinely feel like I had no close family person, being the first on both sides of our families.
Yeah.
My only introduction to babies was a visit from a friend or a cousin coming over and spending the weekend, and just seeing only the positive, loving, cute moments. And so maybe you had a little bit more data.
Yeah, that's a good point.
After you guys brought home your baby, let's dive into sex. How does having a newborn affect Lindsey and Steven sexually?
Well, we legally, as they say, couldn't have sex for 6 weeks. Then we got cleared. And I actually just talked about this on my last episode of my podcast. It was so painful. I'm sure you remember the first time we had sex. Whether you have a C-section or a vaginal birth, I had both because I was in labor for 16 hours until my C-section. You are in so much pain. And if you're breastfeeding, you are so dry down there because all of the wetness is going to the boobs and the milk. So it was like having sex for the first time, like in a bad way, I can't, it was so painful. There was tons of lube involved, and I just wanted to get it over with. It was really for him, not for me. And then I would say a month and a half after that, maybe even 2 months, it started to get okay again. While our nurse was there, it was easy to have sex because she's there and she could be with the baby. Once the nurse left, we definitely had a lull for a little, and then we figured out, oh, he's napping, let's have sex. So we figured it out. But there were countless nights where we were both just so tired. We were like, let's have sex next week. Cool.
So I understand the dryness. I actually think I remember having to get an estrogen cream from my OB to fix that, or at least to make it a little better.
Yeah.
I'm so intrigued by this 16-hour labor where you're pushing and then you end up with a C-section. Did you end up having tears and kind of trauma down in your vagina too, in addition to the C-section scar?
No, thank God. So I never got to active labor. I was just in having contractions, and then my son's heart rate dropped, and so we went into C-section right before active labor would have started. My water had broken. I was having contractions, and a saved by the bell, but saved by the C-section situation. Not that it was saved. I mean, it sucked, but he was saved, and that was what happened. So I didn't have tearing, but I had, my cervix was dilated and all of that. You've had surgery and it's very low, the scar, it's basically on your vagina. And so if you have any surgery that isn't a C-section, your doctor is going to be and it's right there. Your doctor is going to be do not touch that area for 8 months. But since it's a C-section and we're women and we've had a baby, the doctor's like, 6 weeks, you're good.
You're
You know, and
good.
it's like, what? Like, if this were actual, if you consider this the real surgery that it was, we wouldn't be allowed to do anything with this.
It is crazy how people think a C-section scar is going to be way higher than it is. Like, I think people envision it being over the belly button, or at
Yeah.
least in line, or maybe a little below. But it is so low that if you're in one of those really low-rise bikinis, it's kind of
Yeah.
covered.
Right. I wore one this weekend and I feel like everyone was like, what? Where is the, and I'm like, it's low.
So you mentioned that you were kind of, quote, late to the sex game, or I don't know, junior year in high school is late, but you felt like you weren't fast. What then led to this young girl who is, had sex with a boyfriend junior year of high school, and
It was
then
actually sophomore year. I just don't,
sophomore
I
year?
just don't want to give misinformation.
Thank you for clarifying. What led you to be the kind of person who later in life felt like, I want to be this expert and this coach to talk to people about sex and dating, and I feel kind of qualified to be a dating coach and do this?
I think I would, Claire, like I would say I'm more of a dating coach than a sex coach because like I can have sex and I can make myself have an orgasm, but I'm certainly not like a tantric, like sexual deviant expert. I like love a boring position if it's up to me. But with the dating stuff, I really do believe that I give good dating advice with like the close people in my life. And I wish that I had had like someone like myself to guide me when I was dating, because I only got knowledgeable about it like towards the end of my 20s. And I was a disaster dater in the beginning and I did all the wrong things. And I think I learned so much. It's more about like, I want to give back that like older sister guidance that I want people to benefit from. And, I don't want girls to have their time wasted like I did in this situation or that situation. And I also, and like not to toot my own horn because I hate doing that, but I do have really good game when it comes to like texting with guys. And so that I like to help spread and share with the world.
Did you ever feel, especially when you went through a breakup and then you were single, did you ever feel any sort of imposter syndrome about advising people on dating when you were single? Or, I mean, on the flip side of that, being single is maybe the best way to be able to talk about dating. Maybe it's being in a relationship that makes you feel like an imposter.
Such a good point on both fronts. I would say I felt the most imposter syndrome when I was in a relationship that wasn't serving me and I was giving people advice on like, leave him, break up with him, don't settle. And I had done just that. I think once I started dating Steven and was in like my healthiest relationship, I was able to give like peak advice because I was practicing what I preach and it all felt really aligned. But there was definitely a time in a past relationship where I was like, it's fine if he doesn't get you a gift for your birthday. And I was like, wait, what did I just say? And like, I had to be like, no. Like, this is not good.
I definitely have viewed your brand, although I do know that a lot of people think of you as a dating coach or an expert in some way. Maybe it's because I was never on the dating scene when I knew you, and I was with Michael since 2009. But I feel like I view your brand as more of a community place where people kind of go to for polls and advice, but just crowdsourced advice.
Yes.
And that you are kind of the hub of that and not necessarily the person saying, I am the genie guru who can tell you all the best things to do.
Totally. And I always say that. And while I do have dating rules, it's very much a take what works for you and leave the rest. And I love that you said that because that's what the polls are for. They're crowdsourcing, but they're also for like women empowerment because like women will write in and they'll be like, can you ask this poll, is it okay that my boyfriend called me a cunt? And I'm like, no, but like, if you need me to write that to know that like, we're all behind you in this not being okay, then hell yeah, I'm going to put up this poll. Because like sometimes people need an outside perspective and they're too afraid to ask their friends because they're going to be judgmental or something like that.
And after getting married, has the whole brand being, about the single dating life in New York City and we met at Acme, has that just had to naturally evolve with you?
Yes, it has. But it is really important for me to stay authentic to the dating stuff because while half of my listeners are getting married and having kids like myself and, you know, growing with, I think there's also like an influx of newer daters in the city and like college age and things like that. And so it's important for me to kind of still cater to both.
I feel like we could go on and on, questions about sex and your favorite position. I'm assuming it's missionary.
It's actually not. I like to be on top.
Why do you like that position?
Because I know how to make myself have an orgasm in that position.
Interesting.
So it's like tried and true.
I think a lot of people feel that way. I like the opposite. I feel like I can have more control from the bottom.
Interesting. I get that. But I think, and not to turn it around on you and you don't have to answer, but do you also need like a little, like a hand down there too when?
No.
Oh.
All body.
Wow. I'm impressed. You might have to demonstrate it for me.
I could do a demo for you if you'd like. How does Steven feel about you opening up about your personal life and specifically sex life online? Because Michael's, that's his area where whenever I'm talking about sex, I try to keep it to me referring to my body in the act of sex instead of, I mean, I just told you a position we did, which it takes two to tango, but
right.
I do try to keep that as neutral as possible.
He's kind of like, what he doesn't know doesn't hurt him, you know? Like, I'm not going to go back and be like, today on Lucie's podcast. And so, like, if he doesn't hear it, he's not bothered by it. If we happen to be, like, listening to an episode and he hears me say something, like, just, like, crossing a line, he'd be like, what the fuck? But I don't really cross lines that I know. Like, I know where the boundaries are.
So nobody send this to Steven.
I don't think he'd be mad about this.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I loved this discussion, specifically the money stuff. I felt like that was an area that, you know, not a lot of people ask about and not a lot of creators open up about. So thank you for being so candid.
Thank you for having me. This was so cool. You can find me wherever you listen to podcasts, We Met at Acme. And if you are a new mom listener, you can follow We Met at Baby, which is my mom spinoff.
What's going on there?
Just a little mom account where I post like more like crowdsourcing, but just for mom stuff because I don't want to spam my We Met at Acme listeners and followers with that.
That's a great way as a creator to keep expanding the ecosystem of your brand without tainting an existing franchise.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Very smart. Where did Zachary go? He never came.
He never came. Guys, Zachary is like partying in the streets. I'm going to text my nanny.
Where is Zachary?
Where is he?
Well, for everyone who kind of heard the start of this convo, we were slightly delayed getting started because Milo stuck a bead up his nose at camp. So you never know with these kids. Thank you so much for tuning in to The Real Stuff. I'm Lucie Fink. Don't forget to follow the show on social media at The Real Stuff Pod. And if you're liking these episodes, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a written review. It helps the show so much. And if you're feeling called to come on the show, visit luciefink.com/apply and tell us your story. We'll see you next week for another intimate conversation on The Real Stuff.